Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to STRIcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is James Podesta. I'm the Head of Development at STRI, and I'm sitting with a colleague who's going to introduce herself now.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacqueline Diaz-Nieto. I'm Head of Water at EPG, the Environmental Protection Group.
Thanks for joining me today. Jackie, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the Environment Act of 2021, which seems a long time ago now, and also Biodiversity Net Gain and water management issues related to that piece of legislation. I suppose, first off, just to set the background really, the Environment Act 2021 seen significant delays in terms of its preparation and then coming into force. And it's been a sort of topic of discussion for people in our industry for a number of years now. And as we approach the end of 2023, we're actually recording this in November, it was supposed to be coming into force in full effect, and the rules about biodiversity net gain certainly and various other elements in terms of air pollution, water pollution were also going to be coming into force. As we speak on this podcast, that's been delayed sort of indefinitely, or at least we don't know when the Act is supposed to fully come into force, but certainly into the new year, into 2024. So just in terms of background there has been significant amount of delay, and it has caused sort of certain consternation amongst our clients and in terms of the business and the sector in general. I don't know if you've got any experience from clients about this. Certainly from my side of things, the uncertainty that's been sort of pushed by the fact that there's been this delay is causing clients to have concerns about how they're going to accommodate these requirements in terms of developments going forward. So various rules, regulations, policies in terms of how it will affect construction and then delivery and then also in operation as well. So being able to stick to these policies. I don't know if you've had similar experience with clients or people that you work with.
Yeah, I think it's a similar story with Schedule 3, which is the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. Similar sort of thing. It was, Schedule 3, you often hear Schedule 3 mentioned quite a lot, but it's taken out of context a bit, and some people don't quite know that it relates to the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. So, the fact that the Act came out in 2010 and we're still in 2023 waiting for Schedule 3 to become mandatory. Similar sort of rumblings amongst developers, a lot of uncertainty throughout the years and when it will be definitely enacted.
So I think one of the obvious things that's coming out of this is, that level of uncertainty and delay is a real problem for our industry, isn't it? When people are trying to accommodate changes in rules, in regulations, principles, policies, it's very difficult for them to change the wheels of motion, if you like, in terms of how they're reacting to those, especially if, in your case, for Schedule 3, there's been a 10-year delay, and in case of the Environment Act, it's a 3-4 year delay so far. It becomes very hard to accommodate those changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, for one, I'm really keen to see Schedule 3 enacted sooner rather than later. You still hear amongst circles, I think it's more people that are coming to it, haven't been on the journey since 2010, saying, well, do we really need Schedule 3 to sort of almost force new developments to implement sustainable drainage systems, because that's what it's all about, and I'll cover that off in a moment. But I would say, yes, we definitely do, because if we're at this point in time and, having new developments that incorporate sustainable drainage isn't still the norm, we need Schedule 3 to make it the norm. We need the regulations. And just backtracking really, what is Schedule 3 in a nutshell? It was brought about from the Flood and Water Management Act as a recommendation by Sir Michael Pitt at the time, in terms of, if we're to tackle flooding, future flooding, all new developments should have sustainable drainage, which basically slows down the flow. If you use conventional drainage, you do get big attenuation tanks on new developments, but you don't get the multiple benefits of amenity and biodiversity, but also surface water is rapidly conveyed away from the development, whereas sustainable drainage systems slow it down. And Schedule 3 was just the schedule that said there'd be an approving body, a SAB, SuDS approval body, so that all sustainable drainage systems were built to a certain standard set by some national standards. And I think part of the reason it's been delayed for so many years is because there was an aspiration from the planning system that, the planning people would do it voluntarily. Developers and designers would voluntarily implement sustainable drainage systems. But I think given that, more than 10 years on from the Flood and Water Management Act, it's not the norm. We definitely need Schedule 3. Just need that little push, and it complements the biodiversity net gain and all those multiple benefits that we're looking for in today's society. Addresses the ecological crisis and the climate crisis, which is behind the flooding sort of crisis. So I think we need it. It should be a very exciting time for people like our clients to be able to have the legislation behind forcing them to deliver these multiple benefits. And they complement each other nicely. So you should be able to have one design that achieves both the need for sustainable drainage systems and achieving the biodiversity targets.
Yeah, well, I think just picking up on a point you made before about will the industry sort of adopt these standards anyway? Should they adopt these standards? We've seen kind of after Brexit, leaving the European Union, that we have in many instances sort of adopted or continued with European legislation on a number of issues. And in some areas, we've not done that, or we've kind of delayed while we've been reviewing things in terms of how it might affect the UK. And again, I think from my perspective, this has had quite an impact on the industry in terms of how they respond to these challenges. And certainly we've seen with COVID as well, and the impact that COVID's had on material costs, things like that when it comes to developing sites, there are an awful lot of things that our clients have to consider when they're sort of looking at how they build out a development. And when you start having uncertainty around exactly what they've got to deliver from sustainable water management perspective or a biodiversity net gain perspective, in this instance, that's what we're talking about, it becomes very tricky for them to navigate the way through how to deliver a scheme that's compliant with policies, but one which is also going to be deliverable from their perspective. So just picking up on those points you were making there, I think about water management and biodiversity net gain, how those two elements can work together, it's possible to create things that give you a saving overall, I think, is just something that I would pull out of that, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you wanted to expand on that a little bit, because the way that we approach things, STRI, from a sort of development perspective, I suppose, is that sort of triumvirate approach: ecology, landscape, and water management, and how the three of those fit together.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And I think it should be exciting times, really, to be able to, it's not a very good analogy to use, but kill two birds with one stone. I don't want to kill
Not an ecology podcast.
Yeah. But, to be able to have a design where, if you need to build in sustainable drainage systems, often they do have a green aspect to them, a green infrastructure. They don't always have to, but, and that they will provide habitats and provide designers with opportunities to also gain extra points on the biodiversity net gain, creating habitats that might not already exist on the site through your water management system.
Yeah, I think in that context, if a scheme is on the margins of being viable, and you can, create a sort of double win or a triple win, if you like, with the same amount of space, land take, then it's got to be worth them considering, hasn't it? So I think that's the way in which we approach biodiversity, landscape, and water management all fitting together. It's possible to get multiple wins out of the same sort of land area, which, although we're sort of setting out that there are uncertainties in terms of policies, I think the direction of travel is very well understood by the industry as a whole. We know that these policies are going to come into play at some point. We know that they're probably likely to get tighter over time as well, as the sort of impact of climate change is felt more keenly, I suppose, as we go through the years. So I don't think the industry is turning a blind eye or not understanding the uncertainty is causing a bit of an issue, but I guess we're probably saying that they're working to those standards, or the standards that they are anticipating to be coming out anyway. Is that fair to say?
I would agree, yeah. I think, at least from my perspective, and I hope everyone else's, the direction of travel seems to be very clear in that, new development needs to address the ecological crisis with biodiversity, and also provide flood resilience via sustainable drainage systems. So, yeah, the path, the direction seems very clear. But I do think that the implementation of the legislation needs to give it a little push along and make sure it definitely happens.
Yeah. Legislation that was due to come into force this time, in November this year, the basic 10% increase in biodiversity net gain was supposed to be enacted from this point onwards. So although that's not actually become law at this moment in time, I think, you know, the industry and developers, certainly in my experience, are working towards that target of a 10% increase in biodiversity net gain. But of course, what that does is sets up a number of different challenges for our clients, particularly in terms of the assessment process that they have to go through to understand what their existing biodiversity level standard is, if you like, for want of a better phrase, on the site that they're currently looking at, and then how they can achieve those gains. And certainly that's where, again, I think the crossover between water management, landscape and biodiversity can come to the fore again and provide that opportunity for a multiple win across a site. But certainly understanding your site in the first instance and then being able to come up with an objective assessment that gives you that ability to create the percentage increase is the way forward. And I think clients are working towards that. You know, in my experience, there's no client that's ducking that or hiding away from that or, you know, putting it off because they think, you know, well, whilst there's a bit of uncertainty, we don't need to address it. I think they're all fully aware of it. And actually, you know, in terms of the wider climate change agenda, they're looking at ways in which they can improve developments anyway. So whether that be materials, whether that be ways of working, you know, in delivery or in operation, I think they're all looking at that type of approach anyway. And I imagine it's the same in terms of water management.
Yeah, well, the Schedule 3, government have made a commitment to implement it in 2024. So next year at some point. There's still some rounds of consultation to take place in terms of how it's implemented, the creation of these SuDS approval bodies, everything's pointing at local government to take on that board, what's known as the lead local flood authorities, the LLFAs. So there's still a bit of consultation, and as I say, the government are committed to implementing it in 2024. But what I'm hearing about BNG is just really exciting, really, because I think if what you're saying about the clients and developers know that that's coming and you know, will need to work towards BNG, I think it won't be long before the dots are joined and you can think about how implemented sustainable drainage systems will help, as you say, deliver multiple benefits from a single plot of land. And sustainable drainage systems, you know, they recognise the benefits of ponds and wetlands and some of those habitats, I think, get quite, you know, they've got quite a high score. You get quite a lot of offset points. And
I think, sorry to jump in, but I think further than that, the biodiversity net gain, the improvements that are being sought, and the same on the water management side, is all supposed to feed into the biodiversity action plans that local authorities are putting in place or have in place already, so that you have benefit created over a much wider area than just sort of a project site, if you like. So it's supposed to fit in with the district and then with the area and then with the country as a whole, so that we have the wider creation of these green networks, green infrastructure across the country, which actually creates bigger and better habitats, which is what we need, not just a sort of localised improvement on a particular site.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think my understanding, I don't...
Of course, with water, that's even more the case, isn't it? Because it doesn't respect a district boundary necessarily. It's about catchment areas and it's about flows and
the connected catchment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Of
course, it's also quite relevant that we're doing this at the moment while there's a cabinet reshuffle going on. So again, we're just recording in November 23 at the moment, but Therese Coffey, I think, has just stepped down as Environment Minister. So that obviously means there's going to be a new Environment Minister put in place in the coming weeks, or maybe even quicker. And then obviously next year, everybody's anticipating that there's going to be a general election, March, April time, something like that. So of course, all of this could change again pretty early into next year. And we might have a new government in place, they would have a new agenda, and they potentially want to look at these policies again, or maybe they want to look at just getting these policies enacted. So I think politics is obviously playing a huge part in getting some of this legislation, some of these ideas, some of the proposed way forward actually into play. And I think that's one of the key concerns for clients, but also one concern for us, I guess, from a consultancy perspective is, can we actually see some of these changes through? Can we actually see some of this become adopted, become the way that everybody operates? And then we see that starting to come through in project work.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I think what I'd heard was that that was pretty much a given. It was definitely coming in, Biodiversity Net Gain. I know it was due to come in this autumn, wasn't it? But it was
delayed till November, and then in November we've obviously had the further delay to the whole act itself. But in terms of Biodiversity Net Gain, then I suppose looking at it from a sort of site-by-site perspective, we know that we have to do an assessment in the first place, and what that would mean for our clients in terms of engaging with an ecologist, having the whole site assessed, and then looking for this percentage increase, which at the moment is set at 10%. But initial discussions, right at the start of the whole process, consultation process, were more along the lines of, say, 30% of an increase. So actually at 10%, it's a bit of a what's the right phrase? It's a bit of a lowering of the sort of expectations anyway. And maybe as they're reviewing this at the moment and the further consultation, the result might actually be that a higher imposition is put in place. So I guess the emphasis then is even more for our clients and for ourselves to provide our clients that service to understand exactly what they've got on site and how that can be a benefit, or what they might need to do in terms of replacement opportunities, things like that. And when it comes to the types of biodiversity that might need to be put in place to improve or to address a situation, of course that's a circumstance that needs to be looked at by a properly trained ecologist to give advice on. But in terms of what you're looking for, the opportunity to bring in water management systems can help you, as you've sort of alluded to already in the podcast, can help to create different types of habitats, can't it? And therefore a bit more of a varied platform, and hopefully address some of those issues in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some, of course, there are sustainable drainage systems already implemented, but there's still a lot more that can be done with them. Like, you might have seen some new housing developments. Quite a few of them nowadays have a basin. So the old, what would have been a tank on each new housing development is slowly becoming a basin, what was in the SuDS world referred to as an end of pipe solution. So it's kind of like a slow transition to a proper SuDS scheme, because it's mainly piped, but they all go to a basin, which is better than a tank, from an ecological perspective and also water management perspective. But often they will just be a monoculture of grassland. And maybe partly because the maintenance is seen to be more straightforward if you just come along with your mower. But I think it will change with Biodiversity Net Gain, and you'll get more interesting basins, with improved grassland or wildflower meadows, because I believe, the sort of monoculture of grass doesn't get you that many points.
Well, it's an interesting point that you raised there, actually, because I think in terms of Biodiversity Net Gain, it's about the gain. It's not necessarily about, what habitat you've got. So you could be starting off from a low base and you have to increase it by 10% to a slightly less than lower base, if that makes sense. So it's not always the case that you'd need to replace, say, managed grassland with, oak woodland or something along those lines. There are many opportunities to improve the biodiversity of sites through smaller interventions across your site, which could get you that 10% gain without too much disruption to the rest of the development, if that makes sense. So I'm talking to you about sustainable water management systems and things, and the sort of impact that they have on a development, and whether or not they can be used twice, for want of a better phrase again, to demonstrate environmental improvements through water management systems, but also to demonstrate ecological improvements as well. So just for the benefit of everybody that's listening, in terms of sustainable water management systems, what we're referring to there, what we're talking about, are we talking about things like swales, open swales? Or?
Yeah, so basically SuDS, the acronym SuDS, which stands for Sustainable Drainage Systems, is just about slowing the flow really. If you compare them to traditional drainage systems, piped systems and storage tanks underground, more or less out of sight, out of mind, with gullies as inlets. Sustainable drainage systems are just anything really that mimics nature. Nature knows best, and if you've got, say, grassland, it slows the flow. In most rainfall events, it takes the water longer to flow through grass, so it slows it down, or vegetated areas. So in a very simplistic way, that's what sustainable drainage systems are about. They're engineered systems to mimic nature's way of managing draining the land and flowing things.
But I guess that's what gives the opportunity then, isn't it, to have ecological interventions as well. Say an open swale, for example, might just be pure managed grass, but it could have other elements to it that give it a little bit more of an ecological bias, I suppose.
That's it, yeah. And you can tie in, they'll have engineered soils that are designed to slow the flow or achieve the infiltration that you need or the sort of flow rate that you need. But you can plant vegetation and green infrastructure, I think, by combining the disciplines of, ecologists with the water engineers. You can sort of get a system that works quite nicely together, in terms of like the desired vegetation for the site with the water management that's required.
Something else to quickly cover before we do the wrap up, I suppose, is the issue of Biodiversity Net Gain credits, or the credits that can be in place instead of delivering something on site. So the way that the Environment Act is set up at the moment, it talks about the opportunity to purchase, in inverted commas, credits if you can't deliver the biodiversity net gain that you're looking for as part of your development or on the site that you're looking to develop. And this is a system that's put in place to basically allow you to accommodate your required net gain off-site. It's a little bit still in the sort of making, if you like, in terms of the value of those credits and what that represents and how you purchase them specifically. But there are a number of businesses out there at the moment who are acquiring land and setting it up purposefully for this reason, to be able to offer biodiversity net gain credits. And local authorities are also doing reviews of their areas and trying to pull together areas that can be part of a biodiversity action plan and deliver on these things in terms of biodiversity net gain. So there is a system that's coming forward and a way in which people who can't deliver on site can look to purchase off-site commuted delivery, basically. But of course, what we do, STRI, there is also the opportunity to think a little bit more creatively, look outside different options. And in terms of the work that your section of the business, Jackie, does at EPG and mine in terms of development, there is the ability to look at things like green infrastructure and particularly green roofs and networks of those sorts of elements. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was at a conference not long ago. A particular local authority was describing one of the reasons that some of the SuDS options that they opt for, they were saying that they're very strapped for space. It's a very urban environment, and delivering green infrastructure requires space. But then I just sort of mentioned we know of a lot of green roofs in London, which is probably the most space stressed in the country. And that's why I personally think that a lot of developers opt for blue-green roofs as their drainage system, because they don't have the space. So I would fully agree, we need to be more creative about where we look for the opportunities to deliver both BNG and sustainable water management. And it's not always there's the constraints that any developer or client might initially see on face value. If a highly urbanized site with limited space, we've often seen, we've been involved in projects where we've sort of thought a bit out of the box and been a bit more creative about it, and there's always some options really, and something like green roofs, I hope that BNG will help unlock them as well, because you can get credits for them as well, I believe. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's a really good way of being creative, isn't it, with the two issues that we've been tackling today: sustainable water management and biodiversity net gain, particularly on as you say, an urban site where there is not much opportunity for improvement in kind of the usual ways that you'd expect. A green roof solution, of course, could be very favourable in terms of the return from biodiversity net gain and managing your surface water. Obviously there are elements that come into that about cost, and particularly like structural capability of whatever the roof is to be able to take that. But in many instances, it's completely feasible to do this, and it's just all about the design, isn't it, really? It's about a correct design and a good system to manage that. And actually, maybe at this point, to talk about sort of smart systems as well. So ones that can control the release of water, predict when the weather's going to change.
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably the third sort of policy or direction of travel that would complement the ecological and biodiversity requirements with the water management in terms of your surface water runoff and flooding potential, is then the water reuse. I think that's probably the next multiple benefit that will just finish it off, really, because all that water that you can store, hold back, slow down, it can be reused, if only for irrigation of the actual vegetation that it's there, that's on it. So absolutely, I think that'll be the next strand, really. If we're still maximising benefits and looking for multiple benefits, that'll be the next big thing. I think it's being referred to as integrated water management. IWM is sort of an emerging acronym. And smart systems, so in order to make that happen, really, you need an intelligent system that can hold back the water when you want it, when you need it, that can release it and create the storage when you need the storage. So that sort of ties in all our areas, all the natural world with Industry 4.0 and the digitalisation to create opportunities and deliver multiple benefits.
I think that's probably a good juncture just to round up then on today, and thank you for joining us. In terms of sort of parting thoughts, I suppose, yes, policy's been delayed. In terms of the overall picture, I think the industry as a whole and our client base is certainly well aware of the policy aspirations, if not actual policies that are in place, and is certainly working towards those sort of as industry standards, I suppose, in the first instance. But our experience is that, perhaps there's a little bit of reticence, shyness to sort of go the full hog with these things. And I guess our advice will be to make sure that you speak to, a competent consultant that can help in these situations and actually look at some of these multiple benefit solutions. So we've talked about green and grey water roofs. We've talked about biodiversity net gains, and we've talked about the way in which all of those can work together. So landscape, biodiversity and smart water, sustainable water systems all coming together to create multiple benefits for the same kind of land take area, if you like. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jackie, just before we wrap up?
No, I think you've done a very good summary there, bringing all the threads together. I think I'd just end on some personal opinions with Schedule 3, really. I mean, I'm really hopeful that it will be enacted next year. I think we've gone through the period of time where we would have hoped the developers and development would embrace it voluntarily. But I think there's still this is my personal opinion, I think that cost is still seen as a reason to not implement sustainable drainage systems. So I do think we need the policy
to drive that change.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's probably a bit of the fear of change, and that transition to complement what you've just said, James. We've got experience from all around the country where we've been involved in some of the designs for sustainable drainage systems on new developments, and often now you can come up with cost-effective solutions, and especially once BNG comes in, you're going to get multiple benefits from the same plot of land. But I'm still hopeful that Schedule 3 will be implemented next year. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks very much for joining me today, Jackie. It's been really good talking to you. Very interesting topic there as well. I think we'll probably end up doing a follow-up in the new year, depending on how the policy situation unfolds, and certainly with the change in government as well. So watch your space and pick up on the next STRIcast.